Awesome. Hi, Leah. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Happy Climate Week.
Yeah, happy Climate Week. Also, my apologies. There is someone with some sort of really loud gardening tool outside of my window, so if it's hard to hear me, I'm so sorry about that.
Well, wonderful to people are getting out there, getting their hands in the soil. Climate Week.
Yeah.
No worries, and I have to apologize for the new sounds on my end as well. So
yeah, totally fine.
But as we kick off, Leah, I'd love to actually ask you to introduce yourself a little bit further and to share, where you're coming from. And also, as we talk about this really important issue of climate justice and equity, could you share with us some of your inspirational heroes and the have been paving this path for a while now?
Yeah, well, hi everyone. My name is Leah Thomas, and I am the founder of the Intersectional Environmentalist platform and also my blog, Green Girl Leah. And I love to talk about intersectional environmentalism. I was very inspired by Kimberly Crenshaw, who created intersectional theory. And I also studied environmental science and policy. And when I learned a lot more about environmental injustice, I realized that I would love if the environmental community could learn a little bit more about environmental justice and not make it some optional add-on to environmentalism, but I didn't really want to take part in any type of environmentalism that didn't inherently advocate for the protection of all people, and that includes Black, Indigenous, people of color, people from the LGBTQ+ community, and the disabled community. So that's why I decided one day to just write a little definition of what intersectional environmentalism meant to me. And long story short, it's a type of environmentalism that really realizes the ways that the degradation to the environment and to society's most vulnerable is interconnected, and it amplifies the voices and efforts of the marginalized groups of people who have always been here and have been a part of this movement for a long time.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think what is really important to recognize currently in this moment that is getting so much attention right now, but that this is a fight ongoing for generations. So it's really wonderful to be able to stand on for these brilliant minds and brave and powerful souls who have been fighting this fight for a long time. But exciting to see that it is gaining momentum and that people really are thinking about racial and social equality, multiple lenses, including that movement.
It's honestly really cool. I never would have expected in 2020, this would be the year that people were like, yeah, environmental justice. I never in my life, but I've just been kind of trying to embrace it and roll with it. Hopefully this isn't a trend, but if it is, I worked in PR previously, so I'm ready to ride this wave for as long as I possibly can, and hopefully this can lead to some real change in the world.
Amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic and incredibly inspirational. And so this series, this is our deep dive series for Climate Week, and we've really been breaking down these very complex and complicated to the most simplest forms for a more general audience. And so, about climate justice, maybe it could be helpful to start from the beginning. Could you help us just paint for us what does climate justice actually look like, and how is social justice related to the climate crisis?
No, that's so great. So I always like to say climate justice is social justice because to me these issues are so interconnected. And I think oftentimes in environmentalism people focus on the what and not the who. So for example, they'll say, okay, there's toxic waste sites in this one area, that's an environmental issue. There's endangered salmon in this other area, that's a conservation issue. But they don't ask about the who. So the people who might be relying on that endangered salmon, or the people who might be impacted by the toxic landfills and toxic waste. And that's something not just in the United States. When we look internationally, I hear a lot of talk about sea level rise, but I don't hear a lot of talk about the loss of culture, the potential refugee crisis that might happen because of sea level rise. So I think climate justice also focuses on the who of environmental justice and the who of environmentalism to make sure that people are also being protected in that process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And just to add to that, I was able to the launch of Ayana and Catherine Wilkinson, All We Can Say last night, which was really beautiful and inspirational. And part of that discussion was also that the framing of our climate crisis being that scientists are concerned was actually quite a detriment. And we think about this issue because it's not a scientific challenge or a scientific issue. It's really emotional and human. And it's about all of us surviving, truthfully, at its fundamental nature, much a human-centric issue. Not something that is sterile or other or beyond. It's what we're living every day. And I think bringing it back to that and making it emotional and sharing in an artistic way is actually so important because it helps us then recognize and reconcile with this climate grief that we've been feeling and maybe feeling alone in feeling that way. But I think everything that you've mentioned is so important and separating those components. So when you talk about a toxic landfill site or a super site here in the U.S., how many lives have been impacted by that site? How has the groundwater impacted those people? And how many people move actually to the creation of this now toxic site that will take years and years to recover? And it's fun. It is so interrelated, which is why I think this is very hopeful and optimistic. We'll see that this is now a reframing of the movement, but fantastic. And just to continue that a little dive into the issue, as we think about oceans, of course, but share with us a little bit. How does climate change disproportionately impact marginalized communities at the global scale? So we talk a lot about coastal communities, islands that are underwater. I love that you mentioned this climate crisis. That will be a huge piece to look at. But how does this happen at the macro scale as well as quite locally in the U.S. within urban areas? Any insights you'd like to share there or resources?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about the climate crisis, there are a lot of issues that have happened or natural disasters that have happened that can serve as examples of whether or not we are ready in the United States if we are continuing to have more climate disasters, which unfortunately it seems like we are, whether or not the same people will continue to be disproportionately impacted. And it's not looking good. It seems like the same people will continue to be disproportionately impacted. So when we're looking at an example like Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of people will say, okay, well, the hurricane isn't racist or the climate isn't racist. And I'm always like, yes, the climate is not racist, but unfortunately some policies might have some biases. And we see that play out in Hurricane Katrina. When it came to the resources and the resources that were allocated after the hurricane, the resources that were given before the hurricane to prepare people for the hurricane, unfortunately, Black and low-income communities weren't as prepared beforehand because of the messaging and the protocols that was sent to them. And then afterwards, the resources weren't shared equitably. So the people who were able to rebound and have access to loans or other resources, unfortunately, that was different along racial lines. And if we look at other examples, even if we're looking at the wildfires and the people who have protection from the healthcare system, unfortunately, it's disproportionate as well. So those are just a couple of examples of environmental hazards. And if we continue on in the same way without addressing environmental injustice, I think, unfortunately, the same things are going to continue to happen. And when we're looking at this from an international scale, I think I would go back to that example about sea level rise because I think it's incredibly important because people aren't thinking about, okay, if certain parts or certain geographical areas are no longer inhabitable, whether that's because of sea level rise or climate change, it's too hot, whatever it might be, that means there will be some sort of refugee crisis. And as we're seeing right now in the United States, unfortunately, some of our policies are not incredibly friendly to immigrants, which I have a very big problem with. But if we continue to see refugee crises, is the world ready for that? And also we need to ask the question, who is responsible? Because usually it's not the ocean communities or countries. It's usually not the BIPOC communities that are kind of not really contributing a lot to climate change. So should the United States be responsible? Should some of these bigger countries be responsible for people who are going to essentially lose their culture and lose their home and literally lose their country? So I think there are a lot of international policies that we'll probably start to see in the coming years to address some of these natural disasters and kind of social injustice issues that are going to happen with such mass displacement of people.
Yeah, and what I love that you're highlighting too, that what we're seeing within the environmental movement and in response to the many negative impacts from the crisis harkens to broader systemic issues. So the health system, relief efforts, all of these are broader infrastructural issues that are lacking, and with same regard to refugees, we've seen how poorly that's been handled in the past for countries that have been, ridden by war or tragedies, and seeing how willing and open other countries are to open their borders, and what does that like once people are in a new home. So I think, right, that this will be, how can we actually restructure from a more compassionate, just, and humane foundation. Just to add on to that, something that I found quite interesting as I was learning more about environmental justice over the past decade really was that much of this too it's integrated into unexpected places. So things like loan laws and bank loan policies. How can people actually get loans for houses, and how do neighborhoods shift? It's not that this was always a poor community. That's always where the toxic waste dump, the waste management, the chemical plant always existed. Actually, people were able to pay to move elsewhere, and the way that things were zoned can be racist. And so that's what's racist rather than the hurricane, which is what I'm glad that you highlighted. I know we got some feedback there in the comments. So anyways, just wanted to throw that out there. And I think that all goes along the lines of understanding how the economic system works too. So people who know how to play the game can get tax write-offs and boards for renewable energy providers, when people who are unaware of that or don't have the same financial literacy, which of course relates to education and background, are not able to play that same game. And so even as we're thinking about solutions and how we roll that out, if we are rolling out electric vehicle infrastructure, that needs to be done intentionally. The benefits need to be made available, or we can't continue business as usual. I think as you were saying too, like this needs to make an effort to make sure that this is just, and not just hope that it's better the next time a hurricane comes around, when we know that it won't be.
I completely agree. And someone tweeted me, I really need to stop responding to all of my tweets first and foremost, but someone tweeted me and they said, the environmental crisis is too big. We need to choose one. We need to either choose addressing systemic racism or solving the climate crisis. And I think we should do the climate crisis, and then we can address racism. And it just made me freeze for a second, because if we save the planet, or if we are able to have a greener society, but we're not addressing systemic racism or inequality in any way, then we're only saving the planet for a certain demographic of people. And that's usually probably going to be like wealthy, higher income people who aren't from minority backgrounds. So that's something that I think is really important in the environmental community, when people try to say, okay, race and wealth, those are completely separate issues. Maybe for them, maybe because their race or their socioeconomic status hasn't been a really big determining factor in whether or not they're able to experience a relationship with Mother Nature. So for a lot of people of color, this is urgent, and we must address both of them at the same time, because systemic racism and the climate crisis are impacting our right to breathe and our right to be able to thrive. And if we can't breathe, how can we experience joy in this world? So as an environmentalist, that's why I practice intersectional environmentalism, because my climate efforts are not for the protection of only wealthy white people.
Absolutely. No, I think incredibly well put. And I think that's another reason why running away to Mars is not a solution. We'll leave a very limited demographic there.
But who's going to Mars? It's probably not going to be me. Like, there are these people that are able to leave the planet. Like, wow, that's
yeah. But I haven't given up on this one. I'm going to stay here. But what I love that you mentioned too is the privilege also to connect with Mother Nature, and the ability to go out and immerse yourself in nature. When we do think about socioeconomic, geographic, I guess, distribution, for lack of a better term, it does tend to be a lot of, communities, areas that don't have access to nature. We see that a lot in the ocean space. The number of people that are able to go scuba diving, of course, is a very small demographic and community, and it is, though, once you do pull back the veil, go under the ocean, once you climb a mountain, once you get the park even or into the forest, you do have this broader awareness and sense and love and connectedness. And so part of the battle is to make sure that those opportunities are available for everybody. I think maybe, of course, there are so many negative sides to the pandemic that's ongoing right now, people struggling, but one benefit has been that we've seen this halt on travel and tourism, but a lot of people, including minority communities, are actually now hitting the trails where these areas be mostly white. We are seeing people getting there and hiking, and hopefully that's having an impact on their families and communities as well. But
I hope so. Yeah.
Anyways, that one reminded me of as you were talking about connectivity there. So one other question. I know we're kind of getting over time here, but it's just so lovely to speak with you about this. That I'm thinking about, and in exploring the Intersectional and Environmentalist platform, which is incredible and full of resources. So I do urge everybody who is tuning in right now to check that out. But I love that you've created resources specific to different communities. And I think what's so important is to be able to speak people's language, so that you're framing these issues in ways that make it relevant to real people, their struggles, their issues. And so, in addition to talking about climate, this is also more broadly talking about how we change the narrative around the movement so that it truly can be inclusive. And part of that is making sure that you're featuring these issues in a way that people can engage with and realize, oh, I care about that. This relates to me. I can be a hero and take action. Do you want to just speak to that a little bit more and how we can better foster inclusivity?
Yeah, I think so. Creating the Intersectional Environmentalist platform was, I don't know, the most serendipitous moment of my life, because I had this moment where I was kind of going viral online, and then it was cool, it was really exciting, but I was really afraid that people would kind of tokenize me in some way and see me as like the person who does this sort of work. So I was really just thinking about, okay, how can I share the space with all of the people who have been a part of environmental justice history, and a lot of other youth activists that are from marginalized groups that are also experiencing, like, I guess, the viralness that I was experiencing. So when I was talking to some of my environmental activist friends, we were like, why don't we try to create some sort of resource? Because I was getting pretty bombarded with messages from people. They're very sweet, but they really desperately wanted to know, like, they were saying, like, I'm not being taught about environmental justice in school. What can I read? What can I, watch? What can I do? What organizations could I support? So our most immediate need with the platform, it's only been up for about 3 months, was to just get community-specific resources so people could know, okay, I'm really interested in learning about the Latinx identity or learning about the Black identity in the United States, like generally speaking, some environmental justice issues that they might be facing, and how I can learn a little bit more to be a better ally and help support. So that's what we did with the website. We just really threw a bunch of resources together, and then we just launched our editorial part of the site, where we have people writing personal stories and personal essays from a lot of different background groups and identities, which has been really cool. But we just want people to know, like, this isn't just me. This isn't just Green Girl Leah. Like, there's so many people all over the world that are not only just kind of, I don't know, I've seen so many children of color that are leading the way when it comes to finding innovative solutions to the climate crisis, but they're not always, receiving media attention. So we want to find a way to balance that out a little bit and show people, look, there's so many incredible people that you could be supporting and checking out. So that was one of the things and one of the reasons why we did it. And then some commentary that we've gotten that makes me kind of chuckle is when people say, like, oh my God, the graphics on Intersectional Environmentalists, they're like too cute. They're too pretty. Like, wow. I don't know, that feedback just like makes me laugh so hard, but it's because we understood the Instagram algorithm, and we understood, okay, if we are able to introduce a new demographic of people to environmental justice by having cute, pink, well-designed graphics, then that is what we're going to do. That is exactly what we're going to do. So we like to, we're millennials, younger millennials, Gen Z people that are part of our team, and we like to have fun and show people that, you can have fun and you can also have things that are visually, appealing. I studied environmental science and policy, but I don't want my education, I don't want that to be a barrier for anyone. You shouldn't have to get an environmental science and policy degree and read all of these scientific papers to be able to have access to this knowledge. And I think that touches on something you said a little bit earlier about scientists being concerned.
Yeah.
If we could take this back to just the everyday people being concerned about the climate crisis and also having access to this knowledge, I think we can actually create more change in the world if it doesn't seem like this information is only reserved for scientists. So I think that's what we're doing. We want to make it more accessible to everyone, and we want to make pretty graphics at the same time.
I love that. Fantastic. Very in line with what we're trying to do as well, and using art and more creative forms, and being visually aesthetic, it does catch more people's eyes. It's amazing, and there's nothing, I think there's nothing wrong with that in terms of capturing people's attention and then weaving in environmental and educational content once you've captured them. So that's fantastic, and thank you for sharing the story also of how that evolved, of how it's growing. And I saw there was a question on what platform it is. It's intersectional.environmentalist.com, I believe. So you can check that out and see the different resources. And I did promise in our conversation we would talk. We spent some time talking about the issues, which are overwhelming and paralyzing, but I did promise that we would talk about some solutions. So could you share with us maybe a couple of ways that each of us can be intersectional environmentalists? Also ways that if we are feeling paralyzed by the climate crisis, what's the thing that we could start with today in quarantine or at home?
Yeah. I think in order to be an intersectional environmentalist, and even if I came up with one of the definitions, I'm not a gatekeeper of what it can look like. But if I had my say, I would say that an intersectional environmentalist would be very committed to learning and listening. I think when a lot of people find out about environmental justice, their first reaction is how can I save these people? When instead they could be asking the question, to be an intersectional environmentalist, how can I amplify the voices and the efforts and the work of the people who have already been in this space that might just need help with amplification? So I think framing it that way, the first step is to really just listen and learn about different cultures and communities, and not let your ego kind of get in the way of just listening to what other people have to say and really doing a deep dive into environmental justice history. I think that's an incredible place to start. And then the second place is just to amplify the efforts of the work that's already been done, because we need to remember that there are people here. There have been Black environmentalists for a long time. There have been Black people fighting for environmental justice, Indigenous people fighting for environmental justice, Latinx people fighting for environmental justice, disability rights movement that happened. There have been so many things, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just need to identify those people and see how we can support and uplift them.
That's fantastic. And I know you mentioned you mentioned one of your heroes earlier who did define this term intersectionalism, but for a couple of others, I can throw out a couple from our side. Many might be familiar with Robert Bullard. It's thought of as the father of environmental justice. Patel Taylor is an incredible and powerful source. Talia Buford is a really active lawyer defending the rights of people who are living in frontline communities that we've been speaking about. But any other resources? And I know you have a long list on your website. a quick reference.
Some other people, Teresa Baker, she's the founder of the Outdoor CEO Diversity Pledge. Jose Gonzalez, he's the founder of Latino Outdoors that I really look up to. Mustafa Santiago Ali, I was just on a panel with him the other day. He's so incredible. And those are a couple of people, and then the rest of the Intersectional Environmentalist Council. We we've got about 20 people from a lot of really interesting, backgrounds and very intersectional identities. So yeah, I recommend people check that out.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and I think, just if there's a final note everyone here today with, whether it's the tone of optimism or what keeps you optimistic and fight in this journey.
Yeah. I think if I had to leave everyone with one piece of advice, and also sorry about the whatever is happening outside of my window right now, it's very loud. But it would be to remember that progress is better than perfection, and I would rather see a million imperfect environmentalists than a handful of perfect, stringent environmentalists. And I try to remind people that even I am not perfect. Please don't say that I'm perfect, because I'm not. And I think those incremental changes are really important, and that you don't have to go from 0 to 100 with sustainability to feel like you can be included in this movement, and then to make space for people who are interested in this. So, yeah.
Amazing. I love that. Well, thank you so much. If I were to add anything to that, it would just be everyone has their own superpower, and to that, whatever it is. If you're a designer of cool graphics, if you're a collector of resources, if you're a teacher, if you are an engineer or a scientist or an artist, there certainly is a role in this movement. I think you did that for us as well. Wonderful. Well, thanks again so much, Leah. Wishing everyone inspirational rest of their class.